Welcome to the Hello Therapy podcast with me, consultant clinical psychologist Dr. Liz White. If you want to understand your emotional world better and are curious about therapy, this is the podcast for you. I am taking my 20 years experience in mental health to bring you evidence-based psychological knowledge and ideas that you can use to help you navigate life's many challenges. Each week I will focus on a different mental health struggle, as well as answering typical questions I get asked about all things therapy related. My hope is that as you listen, you will start to feel less alone and more empowered to try some of the tips, techniques and strategies that can help you feel better and live the life you always imagined for yourself. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Hello Therapy podcast. I am your host, Dr. Liz White, consultant clinical psychologist and founder of Harley Clinical Psychology. And today I am kicking off with something that is a very common human experience, but one that can have an incredibly negative impact on our mental health and our well-being. The experience of not feeling good enough. And I'm going to be talking about what not feeling good enough looks like, what impact it can have, and what to do about it. And I'll be sharing one of my favourite psychological strategies that I use in my own life and one that I teach my clients in my therapeutic work. And just to give you a heads up, there is actually a free worksheet that goes along with this episode, and it describes the strategy that I'm going to be talking about later. So I will put the link in the show notes. It's 100% free, so feel free to check it out. So let's dive in. So one thing you may need to know about me from the get-go is that I use quite a lot of metaphors in my work, and this podcast is not going to be any different. So I'm going to kick off with a bit of a metaphor, and I want you to imagine that your life up to this point has been written up into a book, and the chapters describe all of your experiences. So your achievements, key moments in your life, the good times, the bad times, all of the details of your relationships, your friendships, and so on. Everything is in this book, organized into the different chapters of your life. And this next question is important. So consider this. What would the title of your book be? So what title would best sort of encapsulate your life so far? Now, if you are someone who struggles with low self-esteem or someone that doesn't feel good enough, or perhaps you're self-critical, it is likely that the title of your book will reflect that. So maybe the title is something like the I'm a bad person story, or the I'm unlovable story, or I'm worthless story. And when you dig into these negative self-stories, these story titles, what they have in common is that old chestnut, the I'm not good enough story. I'm not good enough to be an okay person. I'm not good enough to be someone who is lovable. I'm not good enough to be worthy or worthwhile as a person. Now, not feeling good enough can show up in numerous ways, whether it's a global feeling that you've had most of your life, perhaps because of a difficult childhood, or perhaps you've had difficult childhood experiences, or it can be more contained to a particular part of your life, like work or parenting. Maybe you feel you're not a good enough mum or dad. Or maybe not feeling good enough has been triggered by a particular event like losing your job or a relationship ending. That can be a really common one. And it can be quite subtle as well, like a felt sense that you have about yourself that's just under the surface. Or it can be much more obvious and show up in how you talk to yourself day to day, or how you talk about yourself to other people. And when you persistently don't feel good enough, it can cause you to feel low in mood. It, of course, impacts your self-esteem and your confidence. It can lead to other feelings like feeling like an imposter in your job role or in your relationship or in your friendships even. It can lead to feelings of shame and guilt and just generally isn't good for your mental health. So what can we do about it if we feel like this and it's getting in the way of living a fulfilled, content life? Well, I'm going to talk you through 3 main points today. And first, this may sound really obvious, but it's a super important step in changing the not good enough story. Awareness that it is there. And how do you become aware? Well, you name it. There is something very powerful and often transformative about naming the storyline that dominates your life and dictates your decisions. And if you have this deep sense of not feeling good enough, the second thing I want you to try and take away from this episode is that your thoughts do not reflect facts. So the headline or story that you're buying into that you're not good enough is an internal narrative. It's a collection of ideas and thoughts reduced down into the thought, I'm not good enough. But just because you think it does not mean that it is true. And I wonder if you can notice what your mind says as I say that. Is it saying something like, yeah, but I'm definitely not good enough. I actually have evidence that I'm not a good enough person because I yelled at my kids on the way to school this morning, or I cheated on my partner last year, or I messed up at work massively, or I was told by my parents when I was growing up. And our minds are really good at that, aren't they? They're really good at dredging up lots of memories that can really help us feel like the not good enough story is true. Now, another powerful thing to realize is that you do not have to engage or get hooked by these thoughts or the not good enough story. So have you ever heard of that saying, looking at something through rose-tinted glasses? So that's where your perspective on something is so positive or optimistic, you ignore the negative aspects of a situation. Well, with the not good enough story, it's like you have dark tinted glasses on, and they colour your perspective of the world and how you interact with it. You are experiencing your life through the lens of not feeling good enough. And the first step is to realise that you have the glasses on in the first place. Now, up to this point, you may not have realised this, but now you do. You're in a position to do something about it, to change the narrative you have of yourself, to not engage or buy into that negative self-story that has been holding you back all this time. So the next time you notice that your not good enough story is showing up, and this can be as simple as a thought that pops up in the form of I'm not good enough, or maybe it shows up more as self-criticism, like a thought like I'm rubbish at this. Try and step back from it and see it for what it is. An unhelpful pattern of thinking that makes you feel rubbish about yourself, that stops you from making changes and blocks you from pursuing your dreams and your goals. And once you have stepped back, ask yourself, okay, well, what is helpful to me right now? What action can I take that moves me in the direction I want to go in, that helps me be the person that I actually want to be? Now, you may be thinking, gosh, that is a lot to remember. And the thing is with these tips is that they are skills that you can learn. And a really good starting point is one of my favourite strategies that I teach my clients called Pause, Breathe, Notice and Name, or PBNN for short. And it was first coined by Russ Harris, who's written a lot of books on acceptance and commitment therapy. And as I mentioned, I have a free worksheet that you can download that I will link in the show notes, so do feel free to check it out. So whatever situation you're in, and you can do this silently in your head or out loud if you prefer, or you can use my worksheet. First thing to do, and maybe do it along with me now, is just pause. So just stop what you're doing. Maybe stop moving if you are moving around. Then breathe. So take a slow, deep breath. Really try and focus on the in-breath. Hold it for a moment and then slowly exhale. This is your grounding breath. Now feel free to do more of these, but if you're short on time, then just do it once. Then notice what your mind is saying. So what thoughts are showing up? And you can say something like this to yourself: I notice that I am having the thought that I am not good enough. Or I notice I'm having the thought that I'm rubbish at this. And what you are doing here is important. You are stepping back from your busy mind, a mind that is bombarding you with negative self-talk, and you are observing your mind at work. And in doing so, you're taking the power out of those thoughts. Our thoughts have slightly less hold on us when we can step back from them, when we can watch them or observe them. And the final part of PBNN is name the story. Here's the not good enough story showing up. Or here's the I'm worthless story. And going back to the book metaphor, when you are hooked by a negative self-story, it's as though in that moment you have taken the book off the shelf, you're avidly reading that story, you are immersed in that book. And doing pause, breathe, notice and name helps you realize that you are reading those pages. It helps you realize you are immersed in that negative story. And it helps you decide, well, okay, if I'm sitting here engrossed in this unhelpful story, I can't also do the things that matter to me. I can't also play with my kids or write that important email to my boss or do the yoga that I love doing or chat to a friend. So I am going to choose to put the book back on the bookshelf. Now, a bonus tip with this, and one thing to watch out for when you're doing this exercise, is your tone, the tone of voice that you use with yourself. Because if you have a tendency to be self-critical, or your tone is quite harsh or cold, then the pause, breathe, notice, name strategy is not going to be as effective, because it basically ends up being a tool that you beat yourself up with, and we don't want that. So try and do this exercise with compassion, with understanding for yourself. You know, the understanding that it's really hard to feel this way about yourself. It's really hard to feel not good enough as a person. And using a warm tone is really key. And if you don't know what that might sound like, because maybe you've never done it before, you're just not used to it, imagine that you are talking to a friend who is going through a really tough time and needs your support, and use that tone with yourself. Because in that moment, you need support. You need to help yourself with this narrative. You need to help yourself change this narrative. And being harsh and critical and unkind with yourself is not going to help that process. And don't worry, because I will be talking a lot more about self-compassion in future episodes. So that brings us to the end of the very first episode of the Hello Therapy podcast. Thank you for sticking around for this long, and I do hope you enjoyed the episode. Next time I am talking about self-esteem, but more specifically low self-esteem, how you can spot it and what you can do about it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Hello Therapy. If you found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe, follow and review. You can get more well-being and mental health tips by joining our email list and visiting the resources section of our website at harleyclinical.co.uk. The Hello Therapy podcast and the information provided by me, Dr. Liz White, is solely intended for information and educational purposes and does not constitute personalised advice. Please do reach out to your GP or a mental health professional if you need support. Until next time, take care of yourself.